views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
And hello and welcome to the Bronx Social Justice and Anti-Violence Forums. I am Daren Jaime, and of course today on the show we'll be talking about just that, a show and a forum that actually provides you with a deeper understanding of the issues as well as the inequities that many people face in communities of color. We'll also be presenting multiple points of view and then also promoting civic engagement. So stay tuned because our show starts right now. Racism, police brutality, racial injustice, a constant reminder of the structural racism that America still has to deal with day after day. Constantly embedded into our society throughout history, the relationship between police and community have been strained, particularly in areas of color. And yes, things can be extremely complex. Attorney Royce Russell wrote a book called Cardiac Arrest, and that actually tackles the complex relationship as well as the tactical guide on how to best interact with law enforcement. He joins us now as we have this conversation because in the hearts and minds of many Americans, particularly in communities of color, people just want to make it home alive. And that's a real threat for many people when they have interactions with police. Attorney Royce Russell joins us here, and good to have you.
No, thank you. Thank you for creating a forum so we can speak truth to light.
Yeah. And let's just be honest. I mean, you're an African-American, I'm an African-American. We've all been stopped by police, and we have to admit, whether or not people want to admit it or not, that is probably one of the most scariest occurrences. And like I said in the lead, some people are just very worried about making it home alive.
You know, it's interesting that you brought that up. When you look at the title of the book that I authored, is called Cardiac Arrest, a tactical guide on how to handle unlawful police stops. You know, when attorneys speak and when I speak, we speak for a reason. Every word that comes out of our mouth is coming out for a reason. So let's start there. Cardiac arrest. How symbolic is that to how we feel and the thoughts that we have as African Americans, and in particular African American males, no matter what the age, whether the age 14 to the age 84, of the feeling that you have when you're stopped by the police. Your blood pressure rises, your hands get sweaty. You think that you're having symptoms of a heart attack because your life flashes before you. The things that you could have did, the things that you should have done, the things that you want to do, all because you're being stopped. And it is traumatic. It is unwarranted and unfair. And as an attorney that practices in civil rights, false arrest, police brutality, and is practiced in criminal defense, and born and raised in the Bronx, St. Mary's Projects, Jackson Avenue, 156th Street. I see you. I know. I see you. I will always say that because I'm a Bronx kid in my heart, no matter what. I wanted to create an instrument that we can empower ourselves, that we can reduce the anxiety and have a game plan when we leave the household, that we don't have to worry about the oral traditions of passing down the talk, that we have it 8x5. Small, but very impactful with information that we can have and use when we have these encounters so we can make it home alive.
Yeah. Well, let's walk through this here because when we look at the death of George Floyd and interaction with police, that we now see, the whole world got to see a young man that lost his life snuffed out right then and there. Police make a stop. Many people say, listen, you know what? I want to talk back. I want to do this. Let's walk through this for a few moments. If a person is stopped by the police and you're stopped in your vehicle, what are some of the first things that you should do?
All right. So I want to answer your question, but I want to preface it with is that we know that police have a responsibility, but we can't rely on their irresponsibility. So we have to be responsible and we have to empower ourselves. And far too many times when we have their interaction, we're expecting them to do something for us. How ironic is that? You're expecting the police to actually do something for you. It seems that is the American way. You call the police, they come to help. But in our community, the police are called or the police stop you And oftentimes it doesn't lead to help, but in that moment, in that interaction, you're looking for help. So we need to understand that there is no law that says that they have to tell you why they stopped you. It's not written in a patrol guide. It's not codified in any New York statutes. So when you ask the question, officer, why did you stop me? You should know automatically that he or she does not have to give you a reason. And if you're playing chess and not playing checkers, you should anticipate that even if they had an obligation, non-legal obligation, that they're not going to give you that information. And that has been the history, the long, long history in how police have been more militarized, less community-based, and how they treat our communities. And let me inform you that no matter how nicely you ask the question, why am I being stopped? Can you tell me why I'm being stopped? You should understand, and here's a tactical moment because you asked me, what should you do? One thing, mentally understand that the words that come out of your mouth, no matter how polite, how courteous, and they come out in a form of a question, is not received as that. You're saying, can you please tell me why you stopped me? It is my belief what they're hearing is, just give me your license and registration. They're not even hearing what you're asking because they believe that they don't have an obligation to give you that answer. And if I don't believe I have an obligation to give you the answer, I'm not even recognizing it is a question as opposed to a statement and a chip as to my authority and what I can and cannot do, which creates the escalation and the pivotal one point of hostility, which then goes on and goes on.
Yeah. Well, talk to me about common mistakes that people make. What are some of the common mistakes that people make when doing this?
Okay, so one common mistake. If you notice that the police are behind you and they're about to stop you or you have that feeling, you should automatically call someone. You call that person and you let them know, look, I'm about to be stopped by the police, or I anticipate I'm going to be stopped by the police. I want you to be an ear witness. And how do you define an ear witness? Someone that is just listening to what's going on. They don't have a comment. You're not to comment, because if you do comment, then that police officer is going to recognize that there's someone that's listening, and that will escalate the stop. So you call your spouse, you call your brother, you call your sister, you call a friend, and you say, I'm about to be stopped. I want you to just listen. They put their phone on mute so no background noise can be heard, and you can start to articulate what's going on. What do I mean by that? You say, Officer Robinson, quote unquote, Officer Robinson. So now the listener know that you're speaking to someone that is named Robinson. When that officer takes your driver's license and registration and walks back, hopefully you are composed and you're able to get the information, i.e. the badge or shield, and you're able to tell that ear listener and that ear witness the shield numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so they could take it down. So this way you're not moving in your car. There can be no true allegation that he was going in his glove compartment. And given that nowadays we have smartphones, let's use it. You have your insurance on your phone. You can go to the application if you're fearful that you go to your glove compartment, something may happen, and say, officer, I want to show you my information by way of my phone. Here it is. Here go the application. So, I mean, those are just some of the tips in dealing with that stop. You know, we have a saying called think calm. And, you know, we've been giving out these bracelets. I don't know if we can see it, but we've been giving out these bracelets called Think Calm. Let me get it right. Think Calm. Mm-hmm. And what it stands for is what we want you to do at the time that you stop. So we want you to, for the C, stay composed. And that means stay composed means have the ability to not let your emotions get the best of you, although I know it's hard. Because if you're composed, then you can give me information that I need as an attorney as to who was your abuser. Name, shield, license plates of the car. We want you to be aware. Let me turn it the right way. Be aware. And that's the A for think calm. Be aware. Know whether or not there's cameras in your area. Know whether or not there's cameras on the corner. New York City Police Department cameras or cameras by the bodega. And if you get stopped in that area, align yourself with the cameras, or at least take note so you can tell your attorney that one exists. The L is for listen. Now, I want to be very clear. Yes, you need to listen to the officers and what they're telling you to do, but also you need to listen to what they're saying about you, why they're saying you were stopped as they speak to one another. Listen for names, listen for shield, listen for how they're communicating on the radio. All that information is helpful. And then the last, which we have seen throughout our time, is make a call. And make a call is just plain and simple. You have to know a telephone number that you can give to someone else, that you can memorize, that you can say, hey, Brother X, please call my wife at 718-785-8890. And hopefully a bystander will do that and make a call or make a video. Those are just some of the tips that I like to spread and share with our community. As I say, think calm, stay composed, be aware, listen, and make a call and or make a video. And so I think those are just some helpful tips that if we all arm ourselves with it, we'll be ahead of the game, knowing how people view us.
But then you've got police who say, listen, I don't want to be videotaped or put the phone down or this, that, and the third. What's a person's legal right when they have a camera or a phone, a smartphone?
So the legal right is that you can take a video. It's in a police patrol guide. It hasn't been codified as law that is against the law for a police officer to take that away from you, but it's in the patrol guide. You have a right to video. What I advise everyone to do is use common sense, even though sometimes sense is not that common, but let's try to tap into it. If you're going to video, don't announce it. Now, some people would say, I announced that I'm going to video in efforts of stopping the police officer from doing what we think is going to be something that's detrimental to the person that they're stopping. But if you do that, then you have to know that you're going to become the focus and the object of the police officer, quote unquote, affection. And their number one mission is going to be to try to get that phone away from you. So you can video in silence, but there is no law to say that you can't video. You just need to stay a safe distance away. And it's been an industry norm that a safe distance away is 20 feet or more. And you can video in silence. And it's a great point that you brought up as far as video. When you video, it is important that you remain silent, because if you're talking, then you're talking over what's going on. And I know you might be shocked, and I know you might be aghast, and I know you might want to say, look, he didn't do anything wrong, or she didn't do anything wrong. Why are you harassing him? But what is more important from a civil rights attorney perspective, when we go to sue those that abuse you, is to hear what the abuser is saying. That is critical. So video from a distance and don't announce it.
Yeah. You talked about that civil part. What are we seeing by way of numbers, particularly in New York City? I mean, I know there are a lot of lawsuits that are geared towards police. What are we seeing by way of lawsuits, and how much is the city really paying out every year with regards to wrongful police actions?
Let me just say millions, multiple millions. I believe there is somewhere close to I thought the number was either 11,000 or 1,100 pending cases right now against the New York City Police Department. That's just against the New York City Police Department. We're not talking about corrections.
Right.
Which is another entity in and of itself. And the people that are incarcerated, you want to talk about really getting the backhand of social injustice. They're really getting the backhand of social injustice. But somewhere between, I think that number is around about 1,100 or 11,000 pending cases. It is a high number, and the city pays out a good chunk of our taxpayer dollars to those who've been victimized. And as far as from being detained to physical abuse to death.
A lot. Well, listen, before we wrap, I want to make sure that I get people connected to you, right? If somebody wants to get the book, and then also to have these conversations about what to do. I know that you spend a lot of time educating people. Share with us a little bit about how people can get connected to you, the work that you're doing, and also how they can put their hands on this very, very, very timely book.
Well, you can put your hands on this book, and I'll just show it up and have you know. I don't know if you know that we have a Spanish version now.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Oh yes,
No, last time we left off, all I had was the English version.
Well, let me just tell you. So when you grew up on 156th Street in Jackson Avenue, you cannot have a Spanish version. We are one and one are we. So you can go to Amazon. You can also go to cardiacarrestbook.net. You can go to cardiacarrestbooklaunch.net to purchase the book. You can also go on my website, www.roycerussell.com. ESQ, that's www.royce, R-O-Y-C-E, Russell, 2 S's, 2 L's, ESQ, and just send me an email. Send an email to cardiacarrestbooklaunch.net and purchase at cardiacarrestbook.net.
All right. Well, Royce Russell, we're going to leave it there. Thank you for this very helpful information. I think that a lot of people can definitely take to that. We've got practical information for when something really happens. And I think sometimes when it happens, people are just going by raw emotion and the emotion of the moment. But you've definitely put some perspective into that. Thank you so much for sharing with us. And you got to come back.
I am more than happy to come back, and I look forward to it.
All right. Royce Russell, attorney, the author of the book, Cardi Do When You Get Stopped by the Police. Listen, I want you to stay with us because coming up next here on our show, we're going to take a look at the issue of homelessness in New York City. That's a social justice issue. We approach that with a very special young lady when we return right here in a few.
Who's most at risk for coronavirus? People over 65, people with underlying medical conditions like heart disease, chronic lung disease, asthma, diabetes, people undergoing cancer treatment, and people with weakened immune systems. What should you do if you or a loved one is at higher risk? Avoid close contact with people. Avoid crowds. Stay home if you can. Wash your hands frequently. Learn more ways to protect yourself and others at coronavirus.gov.
It looks bleak. It feels bleak. But the city isn't shut down because our public services keep working. In spite of, and in the face of, the dangers, we can count on them. And to keep them working and funded now and in the future, we need to be counted. Self-respond now to the 2020 census at my2020census.gov.
welcome back. Well, with the COVID-19 pandemic hitting New York particularly hard, there has been an increase in homeless individuals, particularly millennials seeking shelter across New York City. Aside from seeking shelter services, millennial adults are also staying in shelters longer than the time that's usually allotted by the city. Now, the pandemic has been particularly challenging for the homeless because they're unable to self-quarantine, cannot social distance in a crowded shelter, and less than adequate services for health care. So joining us to talk a little bit further and give us some insight more into the homeless population is the program director of a family homeless shelter, Dr. Xellex Rivera. And we thank you for joining us, Dr. Rivera.
Thank you for having me.
Glad to have you. So listen, when we talk about homelessness across New York City, obviously a lot of people will often look at the adult population. But like we said, when it comes to millennials, that's a huge population for homelessness as well.
Correct. So a lot of times when you look at research or the data, you'll notice that it's only on youth or runaways, or it's on adults, like elderly adults, anybody over 50. But there's very little research, especially in New York City, as it relates to the young adult, more millennial generation who is 30 to 40 years old. And you'll come to see that a lot of them have entered shelter trying to start over or seek a new beginning or seek independence. However, they end up staying in shelter much longer than the allotted time given by the city.
Yeah. And so when we look at this, I mean, obviously it's got to be a challenge for the city. Give us your assessment of how you see, the homeless problem and projects that are going on in the city.
So there's 3 different divisions in New York City of homelessness. So there are single adult shelters, there are family shelters with children, and then there are single adult shelters. So it can vary amongst the divisions. However, for the most part, everybody's focus is the housing first model to move them out of shelter as quickly as possible. However, a lot of times you'll notice when engaging clients is that they're not necessarily prepared to go back into the community. So even if they end up getting a job at $15 an hour, they're still not prepared for the other components outside of paying rent, Con Edison, groceries, transportation. So the $15 an hour minimum wage rate will not sustain that person, whether they're single or if they're a family. So they end up staying in shelter, trying to utilize some of the city's resources to exit. And even sometimes that can become challenging because a lot of times the city's resources do not match the cost of living in New York City. It can match certain areas, but it does not match overall the cost of living in New York City. So that's always their challenge.
Yeah. And I know you do a lot of advocacy, particularly in regards to the homeless and those particularly homeless millennials. What would you like to see, or what can we do to better this situation? Because like I told people, when we talk about social justice really centers around this particular topic right here, because there's a lot of people who are in communities of color who really deal with this homeless issue on a daily basis.
Correct. So there's no real cure for homelessness, as a lot of people tend to think of. However, I think that when they enter the shelter system, if we're meeting them on individual basis and not as a collective group, then you'll be better equipped to engage those clients. Some clients do come in, let's say, with mental illness or drug addictions, but some clients just come in because, they had a slum landlord that happened to get them out illegally. So there's always a good variation of the client that you might see. However, if I could make an ideal program, I would make it more comprehensive to where that you're overcoming all of the barriers of that person. So whether it's mental health, drugs, family reunification, childcare, like you're overcoming every barrier before you even consider them actively searching for housing. However, right now in our system, we don't do that. So as soon as you enter shelter, we get you stable within 30 days to say, okay, you're good, you're clean, you're eating, you've opened all the necessary public assistance cases. However, that's it. Then we're focused on housing. Go get a job, save your money. However, being homeless is a form of trauma that's impacted. Some of them were street homeless before they came into shelter. Some of them were just, couch surfing, as they like to call it. Some of them are DV victims. Like, there's so many variations. So by the time they get this stable place that is temporary shelter, they need more than 30 days to just breathe and then go to therapy and process, between going from the park bench now to living in a shelter. So all those kind of things have to be addressed long before you start to tell the person, okay, it's time for you to get a voucher and for you to move out. So I think if I could make an ideal system, it would approach the client on an individual basis and give them more comprehensive services.
Yeah. What are we missing when it comes to that millennial population? Because to think about a millennial being homeless today, that's like, no, that's not in our forefront of our mind. I think a lot of people have stereotypes as to what the homeless population looks like. But we have a lot of what's called the working poor across New York City, and millennials actually fall into that category.
Correct. The crazy part is the stereotype of the homeless person is the person you might see like in a subway station or panhandling on the street. But actually a large majority of the homeless population across all divisions look just like me and you and everybody else. They're not necessarily panhandling and on the streets. The thing that we're missing with the millennial generation is that we're assuming that because this generation had opportunities to go to college and should have completed college, that they should be better off. However, one of the things in my research was that they're not necessarily better off because they have more financial debt and they're coming home to live with their parents. And ultimately, they're choosing not to leave their parent, or if they do choose, now they're choosing shelter as an alternative because that's their way of finding independence. So we're missing the whole point of just assuming they should be good. You went to college or some college, you should get a better paying job. But in New York City, between the job market and then the housing market, even if they have some college or full college, they still cannot sustain living in New York City. So that is the hardest part to understand. And, on some spectrum of the characteristics, they tend not to ask for help as freely. However, once they get help, they will continue the process at that point. So it's again, a wide spectrum of things.
Are we seeing any trends with regards to why people end up being homeless? Is it because can't afford rent? Is it because of evictions? What are we seeing as some common threads in homelessness?
So common threads would be homeless eviction is big on the family side. Sometimes families, especially with children, they'll probably get evicted because they can no longer afford to pay the rent. On the single side, you might see a more increased level of drug abuse or mental illness. So it'll vary depending on whatever division that person is coming from or working on. But for the most part, most of the themes are drug abuse, family reunification. Some people got put out, so they could not longer stay there. They were squatting or there was not enough space. So they were put out of that place, which is not a formal eviction, but basically the person did not have enough space. But for the most part, it's mental illness, drug abuse, either evictions, domestic violence, or they were just completely put out of their house of residence, maybe with their family or friend.
And what about, I know the courts are filled with with cases about housing court, and a lot of people, especially after COVID-19, have been given a reprieve. Do you estimate that given COVID-19 and what's happening right now, that we could possibly see an increase in the homeless population, given the fact of so many people out there, 22 million across America, unemployed or filing their first unemployment. And we know a large chunk of that is coming right out of our state.
So I think initially there will not be a dramatic increase, but it will begin to incline because, if they've gotten, the unemployment benefits here were relatively good in New York State. So they might be able to sustain, but after a while, they might not. A lot of jobs have let people go after a furlough. I've had a couple of clients that initially were furloughed, but then once it hit 3 months of COVID, they're now completely terminated or laid off. So I think that there will be an increase, especially amongst families with children when the housing courts open back up. So I know a lot of people were told not to pay their rent or to pay their rent, like it was kind of in limbo. So I think that will increase the amount of evictions as soon as we open the courts back up.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about your work. Obviously you're very tied into the homeless situation, the homeless population. Give us a little bit about what you do.
So I've been in residential settings or shelter settings for 10 years, believe it or not. I started my career on the single side in single division of shelter services, and I kind of worked my way up to the families with children under 18 division. I'm passionate about it because they just need hope. I think a lot of times, and I was one of these persons as well, who believed that the homeless person was only the person panhandling on a subway or on the corner. It wasn't until I actually started working in shelter that I was able to see that the person looks just like me and they just had a bad hiccup, or, eviction, or, sometimes landlords increase rent. All of these kind of factors came into play. Through my work, I've come to the realization that we're not meeting the clients where they are, even though we like to say that we are. We're focused on numbers and statistics, and, we got to get them back out, but there's also a lot of recidivism. So you might get them back out and give them a program, let's say, that gives them 1 year of rent or even 5 years of rent, and then they're still not internally stable to survive in New York City. So even after the voucher runs out, I've had hundreds of clients who've come back. They're like, okay, my voucher ran out, I'm back. I still don't know what to do. So that is when I started to, most of my research focuses on meeting the client and understanding what they're going through. There are people who, especially in family shelters, you have clients that come in here. Yes, let's say they have 2, 3, 4, 5 children. But that does not mean she knows how to cook. That does not mean that she knows how to clean. And therefore, it keeps her stagnant longer because she's unable to, provide for her children. And that's her main focus. And then housing is like, 3rd or 4th on the list. So if we start to, my advocacy really comes from, if we can look at them as people and then address all of their barriers, because housing is not the only barrier, it is just one of their barriers. And we need to start looking at that as a whole. So that's where my passion and advocacy came from.
Yeah. Talk to me about vouchers. I mean, critics have said that the voucher system works, but also at the same time, it's not enough. Talk to me about what your perspective is with regards to the vouchers, and are people getting enough? We talked about recidivism. Is it due to the fact that they're not getting enough?
So the voucher amounts typically do not match the cost of living in New York City. They're following, I believe, federal lines as it relates to poverty. So for example, if I have a family here that is a 1 and 2, which means it's 1 adult, 2 children, and they end up with a voucher for $1,580, that means they need to find a 1 or 2 bedroom in a borough for $1,580. And that's not really likely to even find a 1 bedroom at this point for $1,500. So, and they cannot add to those vouchers. So let's say they can afford to give more on top of the voucher, they're unable to do that. So that's one reason why they're unable to move out. Then if they do move out, they'll probably exhaust the voucher, and then they're not prepared moving forward. So there's a couple of vouchers, and the city, I would applaud the city on that point, that they've created all of these avenues for people to have vouchers to move out. It's just that the vouchers are not matching New York City's rent. So that becomes the issue. As it relates to recidivism, once the voucher runs out, a lot of times either they're not prepared to take on the rent after that point, or the rent increases significantly. So if you get a landlord who, let's say, took the voucher at $1,580, and then the voucher has now run out after a year or so, then they'll just increase their rent back to whatever the market value is, which might be now $2,300. And the client is unable to pay that amount of money, especially if they're still maintaining minimum wage jobs to survive. So they end up coming back to shelter and trying to get another voucher to do that whole process over. There are actually selective parts of New York City that you think about in shelter to place clients because they're more affordable. Like the Bronx. The Bronx is actually one of the boroughs that are considered to be more affordable. Therefore, you end up placing more shelter families or clients in the Bronx as it is.
Yeah. And I've also said the crime, if you will, the crime is the fact that you have these vouchers. And as you said, the rent market continues to go up. And so it's almost like you are serving somebody a recipe for disaster. When you give them a voucher, the rent market continues to go up. And it's almost like, well, we're going to see you again, because there's no way that you're going to be able to navigate this because the numbers just don't add up.
Right. And that's, I mean, I hope that's not really their thought process, but that is kind of how it goes. You exit, and even like when you think of smaller families, they exit on a voucher that's $1,323. If you can really find an apartment anywhere in New York City, even the Bronx, at $1,323 at a 1 bedroom, you'll be pretty successful. So all of these people end up going out and then it's supposed to include utilities. But if it doesn't, then that person now is paying through their voucher. And even with the voucher, families have a portion to pay. So even though the voucher is $13.23, depending on how HRA budgets their account, they might end up still paying, whether it's $200, $300, $400, $500 of the $13.23. So then the city ends up paying a portion, then the client pays a portion as well in regards to that voucher. So then if they can no longer sustain that, then they end up right back in shelter trying to start the whole process over again. But a lot of our clients also look to NYCHA for housing opportunities as well. So they always frequently try to apply for public housing.
Yeah. All right, we're going to leave it there. Dr. Xellex Rivera, got to bring it back. You can definitely give us an understanding as to how things are progressing, especially after we get a little bit further in the phase process in COVID. Love to have you come back and share with us.
Absolutely. Thank you again for having me.
All righty, Dr. Xellex Rivera here with us here. Listen, want you to stay with us. We do have more show coming up. We are going to be right back, coming up right after this.
Why should young people care about the spread of coronavirus? Well, we know that people with underlying medical conditions over the age of 60 are at highest risk, but they've got to get it from somebody.
So we're asking everyone to be selfless for others so that we can protect those who are most susceptible.
Not going to bars, not going to restaurants. It all just means physical separation so that you have a space between you and others.
For more information on how you can social distance, please go to coronavirus.gov.
And welcome back to the show. The fabulous, independent, educated radicals for community empowerment, better known by the acronym FIERS, is an organization that's building the leadership and power of the LGBTQ youth of color in New York City. And the organization aims to further build the leadership, political consciousness, as well as organizing skills of LGBTQ youth. Now, in New York City, FIERS organizes campaigns to fight harassment, as well as violence, and increase access to safe public space for LGBTQ youth. And joining us here to help provide some insight is the executive director of FIERS, which is known as the fabulous, independent, educated radicals for community empowerment, Mustafa Sullivan. And Mustafa, good to have you.
Nice to have you too. Thank you for having this moment.
Yeah, I try to get the acronym FIERS in there to make sure I got it all together there, but thank you so much.
There's a lot of members who forget also, you know, it's deep. It means a lot. You know?
So talk to us a little bit about exactly what does FIERS mean?
Well, FIERS, ironically, is a youth organizing group that I worked with and became a member with 20 years ago when it started. Originally, the organization started to fight against police violence and gentrification in the West Village. At the time, in 2000, this is when the city first decided to gentrify the West Village, and the West Side Pier was on the chopping block. If you look at the West Side Pier now, it's a nice little park, but at the time, it was a haven for like young LGBTQ folks like myself coming up in New York who needed a place to be, who needed to meet community, and who met some of the people to this day who continue to house young, homeless, queer, trans, and gender nonconforming young people, not just providing them a shelter, but also providing them the opportunity to organize. And now the work that we do in the Bronx is particularly around ending youth homelessness, being in solidarity with communities of color, including the parents and families who've lost lost people to police violence, mm-hmm. and ending not just the police system, but abolishing prisons and making sure that we don't have cops in our schools. And also, in addition, that homophobia and transphobia is not happening in our schools or in our neighborhoods.
And when we talk about, in the neighborhoods, obviously a lot does still continue to be out there. We talk about racism that still exists, but homophobia is still real as well. I know that you're doing a great job in terms of educating people. How do we go about bridging the gap when we talk about that?
Well, I think the first thing is that we need to trust the Black, radical, queer folks, community organizers, leaders, community folks who are already in our neighborhoods, right? I'm from Brooklyn originally, but I've been in the Bronx for 20 years. And often, my word isn't trusted, right? There's different organizations, I live in the Fordham area, there's different organizations that benefit off of talking about Black Lives Matter, for example, but don't support me directly. Forget about not knowing the history that Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson put down in terms of fighting against police violence, forgetting about the history of many of us, including myself, who've always put myself on the line for Black community and all over the city. And so I think, one of the first things that we have to start, you don't have to look far. There's many of us in communities who are fighting, against evictions, fighting for more equal rights for all people. And we also know that we will not be erased from history or organizations that choose to use us, use the quality of our work, which has literally happened to me directly, and it's happened to FIERS as an organization. And we need to start telling more of that truth, including, like I know, for example, Richie Torres. I know Richie Torres very well. And, though he does some work, I guess, to support homophobia, he doesn't support organizers at Marsha's House. He doesn't support FIERS fighting against police violence. And he directly works with police. We know this because the families that I work with directly, who lost many people, Iris Baez, all the different folks who lost people, know that Richie Torres in particular does not support our community organizing work. But yet we're talking about, now we've defeated a homophobic pastor. We have to get off of that kind of stuff. We have to really work much harder to tell the honest truth about our leadership, whether they be Black LGBTQ folks or white capitalist folks in our communities.
Let me ask this question about the LGBTQ community when it comes to social justice. Do you feel as though the voice is being recognized and respected?
No, I mean, like, again, you know, one of the reasons why Richie Tour is one is many LGBTQ folks in this city, some of them who are white, supported his campaign, not talking to me, stepping over me to talk to someone who's supposedly supposed to represent this district, who, by the way, just to be clear, I've known since before they ran, since they ran their first election for city council. You know, that I think is one of the pervasive problems, is that you have folks like myself or young people or anybody who doesn't agree with just voting or doesn't just follow the party line or whatever progressives have put out there, whatever. When we don't support that and we speak truth, they ignore us. They act like we don't know what we're talking about. They pretend they never met us and never spoke to us. They do a lot of the things that the mirror, right? I see the police violence. I didn't see it on TV. I wasn't aware that there was an LGBTQ organization in the Bronx, for example. I've been here for 4 years. I've been in this particular movement for 20 years in my whole life. Whether it be the LGBTQ movement, when I came out in 1990 something, I'm not gonna go into all of that. But I've been here, I've been present in many movements, and I've seen how Black folks are repeatedly erased and stolen from or used as props.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen it all.
Well, let me ask this then. When you talk about not being respected, the other question comes to the issue of discrimination. I mean, and when we talk about LGBTQ discrimination, there's also discrimination you feel like in the healthcare field, particularly when it comes to those of transgender gender.
Yes, trans women, trans people of color, trans men often are not only misgendered in the healthcare system, but also forgotten, erased from LGBTQ history. You know, right now, for example, luckily, through the organizing of many organizers throughout the city, not only are we gonna have a Reclaim Pride March, but we're also gonna have a party hosted by STAR, hosted by Fierce, hosted by Reclaim Pride and several organizations on the pier. Normally, if you remember, we have corporate pride, where police have rainbow LGBTQ folks, and a lot of organizations pretend to be down with Black LGBTQ folks, but they only call us during this time, during this month. This is pervasive. It's in the LGBTQ community directly. It's the result of all of the way that gay marriage erased the fights that we have fought. And this is one of the reasons why not only am I a proud supporter of Black Lives Matter as an idea and concept, but I know the people directly in multiple cities who do this work. And I see that Fierce is not just a part of a movement that some people joined recently, it's a part of a legacy, a long legacy of Black, queer, radical folks who are trans, who are gender nonconforming, who are Black, brown, Afro-Latino, all of that, fighting many fights, enemies on all sides. And it's really sad, and it continues.
So where do you see things going from here? Because obviously we're seeing a lot of acquiescing from parties when it comes to dealing with the racial issues and now more affirming of the African-American community. When we talk about LGBTQ, of course, June being Pride Month, and it being more than just a month, I'm sure that you're looking for a different kind of affirmation. So if you had to say what it is that you really would want in this time, in this season, from people, what would that be?
I would say commit to fighting for transitional housing for all people, including homeless folks. I would say trust the young people when they say not only do they not want police in their schools, but they don't want police in our neighborhoods. Many of the folks who were protesting, and I know because I worked with them, I was on the ground with them, they were young. They were very young. And so they have an analysis that needs to be listened to, but it's also not confused by, you know, all these stories about looting, or even just quite frankly, just being real, we just got into a whole internet argument around fireworks, right? And I know it's bothering a lot of people justifiably, but also now we could see the mayor once again using the angst in our community to put police on our streets, the illegal fire. Still need the mayor to defund the police, but yet now we need the mayor to step in to help with fireworks. This is violence, y'all. And we have to, I think, in direct answer to your question, we have to focus on structural violence. And within our communities, we have to lift off the leadership that's authentic, that's actually doing direct work, and not be confused by either white saviors or Black folks who are capitalists and only looking for their own personal advancement over the collective.
Let me ask the question about this. Why do you think it's so hard for people to accept the LGBTQ community?
It's about internalized oppression, as far as I'm concerned. It's about a belief that comes from capitalism that only men or hetero relationships are valid. It's about people, like just being real. Many of the folks in our community just put young people out on the streets when they don't agree, when they think, their Jesus told them to not accept queer folks, to not accept gay folks, to tell young people to go. And let's be clear, it's not just a thing that happens in the South or in rural cities. It happens in the city too. There are plenty of young people that I work with that their parents put them out to, right? And so we have to talk about that type of internal violence, and that comes from individual oppression, right? That comes from the internalized oppression that makes us feel like people can't be different. Black folks only have to be this way. They only have to be in hetero relationships. Or on the flip side, in LGBTQ conversations, they only want to speak to nice, peaceful LGBTQ folks. Stonewall was a riot. I'm not confused about that. The civil rights movement was not just about MLK, no matter how many people want to quote and live by nonviolent direct action. That's not real history. Learn the history. If you're serious about movement, about the advancement of Black folks, LGBTQ folks, immigrant folks, look underneath the story that's presented to you. Look underneath how people who say they're working in a community, what they're really doing. Look underneath all the stories, and even my own story. Look at me. I have a real record. Look at Fierce. It has a real record. And have real conversations about the reality, the real material reality of what people are actually doing to change this community. Like, for example, just being real, we do multiple things, including participate in legislation. Even if we know we want to abolish the police, we know where the city is, and we make a realistic assessment of where we can be to move the city forward. And we will continue to move the city forward as an organization, as movement leaders. My staff is made up of movement leaders who are young, who are from this city and all over this country. We're serious about fighting for homeless young people and ending police violence in a way that gets them out of our communities. And we will do it over time, and we will make sure that people in our community really honor that. And we'll talk to folks. I meet with people in churches. My youth go to people in churches, meet with folks all over. It's not like because we're LGBTQ, we don't talk to quote unquote straight Black folks, regular Black folks. Like, we're in the community directly. And our voices need to be really heard, not sidetracked, erased. A lot of folks like to take the edges off, right? Oh, I want to support what Mustafa said, but I don't like this part, so let me just cut around it. I don't like what that trans woman did. Layleen died.
But let me...
And the Bronx DA, Layleen Polanco, died. Yes. I just want to say this real quick.
Oh, yeah.
The Bronx DA is also complicit in this violence, right? Layleen Polanco died in Rikers Island. And the Bronx DA decided that whatever happened, which we know was torture inside the prison by police, in solitary confinement, that happened in the Bronx DA decided that was not, there was no criminal acts. That was the Bronx that decided that, the Bronx DA.
Well, look, I just want to jump in before we get down to the end here and ask you about this, because looking at that case and looking at other cases right there, when it comes to the LGBTQ community, political pressure has always been a thing that has occurred through the LGBTQ community. Do you feel as though, because you have critics on the other side who say, listen, LGBTQ has a huge voice in terms of, you got legislation passed, things have happened. So there is, from a certain perspective, would you agree, a lot of political backing through this community?
Right? They skip over us because it's like, it's a comfortably nice narrative, right? Nice story. Richie Torres defeats Ruben Diaz Sr. Nice story. But the reality is that story is on the backs of the deaths of Black people in this city. The deaths and the disregard of mothers, daughters, families, who not only have faced police violence, not only have faced homelessness, not only Black straight people, but also queer and trans people. And yet Richie Torres disregarded all of us. But yet the LGBTQ folks in Manhattan, or the folks in this city, or the folks in the Bronx with privilege, can decide over all of that Richie Torres is a great choice. There are many choices, including Samelis Lopez, that actually works in the community. But because the LGBTQ community, the white folks in particular, wanted to support Richie Torres, that was a better story. Didn't ask me, by the way. Again, been here 20 damn years. I even got an award from some of these folks. But yet to ask me about politics in the Bronx, in my own district, nah. Let's just go with the safe choice. Biden, by the way, we know is the safe choice. Same thing, but now it's happening in the Bronx. Same message. Just get with the Democrats. Everything gonna be A-okay. The Black or Democrats.
Mm-hmm. That's another conversation. Got to bring you back to talking about, Democrat, Republican, LGBTQ community. Definitely want to have that conversation. But Mustafa, thank you so much for sharing with us. Mustafa Sullivan, talking about Fierce. Before we go, if people want to get connected to Fierce, how do they do that?
I would look to our Instagram and our Facebook, where our website is still under construction. It's old and we're having issues technologically. But please look at our Instagram and Facebook. We have all of our events. If you want to meet some of us, like I said, Sunday, we'll be out on the pier and also in the Reclaim Pride March. And we also will be at an action this Thursday with the Justice Committee and the families of folks who've been killed by police violence. And folks all over will be doing the action at City Hall on Thursday. So if you want to see us in person, we'll be there. And I'll be talking.
Okay. Mustafa Sullivan, our guest here on the show, and I want to thank you.
Thank you.
Gotta let you know, listen, we have come to the end of our show today, and we hope that you enjoyed the show. We hope that you enjoyed the conversation, the discussion, and also the information that's been presented to you on the Bronx Social Justice and Anti-Violence Forums. Now, if you want to catch the show, rewatch the show, all you have to do is stay connected here at BronxNet Television. You can find out more through the Recablecast right here. And then if you want to join the conversation even further and present your point of view, always go to our social media sites, and there you can always click in and let people know. We ask that you join us next week. We're going to elevate the discussion, talk a little bit more, and bring further awareness across the globe. I'm your host, Daren Jaime, saying take care, God bless, and we'll talk to you next week.